Welcome to the next podcast from Millinery.Info. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie, and it's so wonderful to welcome you to this episode of Millinery.Info. In this series, we welcome leaders in the millinery industry from across the globe into your ears and studio. I'm so excited to welcome Cassie MacGregor to this episode of the podcast. Before we dive into the interview with Cassie, I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to our Patreon podcast sponsors and welcome our new podcast sponsor, the Millinery Retreat School of Millinery. And of course, a special thank you to our ongoing podcast sponsors. This includes Hatblocks Australia, Be Unique Millinery, Hat Academy, Hatters Millinery Supplies, House of Adorn, Judith and Millinery Supply House, Hats by Lico, Lifted Millinery, Louise McDonald Milliner, Millinery Australia, and the Hat Magazine. You can find a link to each of these businesses in your show notes through the podcast app that you're listening to or on our website. Thank you so much for listening today. And if you'd like to show your support and become a Patreon of the podcast, you can head over to our Patreon page to sign up. There are 3 tiers available, so you could join as a podcast sponsor if you're interested in hearing your business name mentioned, or if you'd like to show your support so we can continue to bring you this content, there's 2 other tiers available. One's called A Little Thank You to Millinery.Info, and the other is Millinery.Info, You Inspire Me. We love bringing you this content, and your support is so important so we can continue to produce these episodes into 2025 and beyond. I hope you enjoy this interview with Cassie. Thank you so much, Cassie, for joining me today on the podcast. It's wonderful to have you as part of our podcast series.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Could you take us back to the beginning of your millinery career? How did you first come to millinery?
I feel like everyone always has such an interesting millinery story. I was living in New York, and it was after 9/11, and it was really hard to be in the city then. So I decided that I wanted to do some things that you could only do if you were in New York. So I started taking evening classes and tried a variety of things that I was not good at in any way. I did painting restoration. I did jewelry making. None of these things panned out. And then I took my first hat class at FIT, and it was filled with people just like me that were kind of trying to get out of their day jobs, trying to find, their passion in New York. And the first hat we made was a gathered beret, and it turned out the way that I had seen it in my head. And I just knew, like, this is it. This is what I want to do.
What a magic moment.
It was. And it was like really like I felt it. I was like, oh yeah, no, this is it. So I did evening classes at FIT for 2 more years. And then I finally quit my day job and switched over to trying to get some work as a milliner.
Was your day job creative or related in any way?
It was. It was a really fun job. I worked in an auction house and I loved it. I just hated being behind a desk. I just knew, like, how do I get out from the computer and the desk? There had to be a way. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. And who were you learning from when you were at FIT?
I was taught by Sandra, and then I was also taught by Janet Linville. I kind of alternated between the 2 of them. And then they had such a fun program there with evening classes. I did their classes, and then I also took some small business classes at the same time. I knew I wanted to go out on my own, and that was like where it was headed. So I just tried to pick up every little bit of like business millinery information I could get.
Yeah. How awesome. When you were studying, did you have a vision of what kind of hats you would like to be making when you were going out on your own?
I always loved fascinators and fancy hats. They were always the thing that was calling my name. Partly because you could have fewer supplies and make those versus fedoras and stuff. You needed to own more blocks. So I started off doing a fascinator out of felter straw where I would, hand pinch little pleats all in it to take on shapes, and then let it dry and cut it out and trim it with feathers and stuff from there. And that was my first style that I was doing. And I remember taking them to Linda Pagan at the hat shop, who's like the patron saint of New York milliners. And I showed her like my little collection of cocktail hats, and she was so fabulous. And she was like, I'll take 6 to start. This is great. And I just went flying out of her shop on cloud nine. Like, I've made it. Linda wants these hats. Like, if this goes nowhere else, like, I've had this moment.
That was the moment that kind of you were there.
Yeah. Yeah. It,
So
it,
cool.
it was, it was really special. I still remember that feeling.
Oh my gosh, how amazing. So you come out on cloud nine. You've just had some hats stocked. Where are you making from at this point? What's your creative space like?
I had a tiny studio apartment on the Lower East Side, and this was kind of happening in conjunction with some other things, but I ended up getting my hats in the hat shop, and I ended up moving to Portland, Oregon temporarily. I was breaking up with a boyfriend and was like, I got to get out of New York. And so I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I had a little studio space there outside of my apartment. And I was making the fascinators there, and I was sending them back to Linda in New York. And she called me up one day while I was selling hats, sunglasses at Nordstrom's, which was my other job. And she was like, one of your hats is on the cover of W magazine. And I was like, "Oh my God, you're how did this even happen?" And she said they borrowed a bunch of hats for a photo shoot and they never used them. And so she never even told anybody that they had borrowed them. And then the issue had come out and it was Natalia Vadanova and like her upper body and my hat was on her. And it just blew my mind. I couldn't get a copy of it in Oregon yet. I sent a friend of mine in New York down to a bodega to like get the issue and describe it to me. And I was like, oh my God, that really sounds like it's my hat. I think that's it. And that moment was another one of those moments where I was like, okay, I do really want to do this and I need to learn more about what I'm doing. So when that happened, I ended up moving back to New York and I got an internship at Lola Hat, which
Yes.
was fabulous. So this was my first non-paying internship. So I worked for her, which was a great experience. She was making everything in her workspace in Manhattan. So I got to work with all these ladies who had been with her for forever and were making the hats. And while I was doing that, I emailed the other 20 milliners in New York trying to find work and hadn't heard back from anybody. And I ran into a friend of mine who was with an intern for Proenza Schuler, the designer. And he was like, "Oh, our hat designer is looking for some help right now. He's making hats for the runway show. Can I pass your name on to him?" And I was like, "Yes,
And
that would
you?
be fabulous. Please pass my name on." And then a couple days later, I got a call from Albertus Swanepoel. And he was the one who was making hats for them. And he had me come up to his apartment on the Upper West Side. And I was able to help him with like 3 kind of different collections of runway hats that he was working on. And then he ended up sending me home with all of these fur trapper hats to sew up for Paul Smith. And I was in this teeny tiny studio and there was fur all over the place as I was trying to, hand sew all of these trapper hats together. And then I would go into Lola and talk to the ladies there. Am I doing this right? Is this what I should be doing? And they were so kind and so generous. And then when I was done working for Albertus and had turned in the hats, he was like, "Who else do you want to work for?" And I had really been wanting to work for Lynn Mackey, the theatrical milliner, but she hadn't written me back. And he was like, "She's my downstairs neighbor. Call them on Monday." And I did. I called them on Monday, and then I was able to get an internship with her. It was really amazing. And Albertus just passed away a couple of days ago, and
Yes.
I will always think of that story and how kind and how generous he was, and like so happy to pass on information and help me find more work in the millinery world.
Which can be very challenging, particularly when you're coming in with fresh eyes and you've got to take up those sometimes unpaid internships to get that experience and make those
Because
connections.
I needed experience. I didn't have it. And I felt like every step of the way, someone was being extremely nice and kind. I had never sewn before I got into hats. And so while I was doing these internships, I was also taking sewing classes at FIT. Again, they have all these evening classes so I could get
Yeah.
better on the sewing machine. And then when I was done working for Lynn Mackey, I sent my resume out to everyone again, this time with more experience. And I
That's
ended up getting a job with Suzanne Millinery, who was on the Upper East Side.
amazing. And what type of hats did you get to make with Lynn for the theatre productions?
I got to make, I did some pieces for Wicked at that time. She was working on Wicked, so she was doing the white beret that Glinda, the Good Witch, wears, and then also this other leather piece that had all these spikes coming through it. And then I also got to help with some pieces for Mamma Mia,
Fun.
which was really fun, kind of the shower cap hats that they wear. And then
Yes.
she also doing some stuff for Spam a lot at the time. It was really fun. I was not a theater person before that. And they
Yeah.
are like, those costumers are a whole world unto themselves. And they know things that how solid and sturdy those hats were. It was great to learn those skills that they used in order to make something last a long time through multiple wears.
What a sensational experience to get exposure to theatre and fashion and runway all within such a short
Oh,
space of time.
I felt so lucky. And that, the thing that I wanted, let me take advantage of living in New York. And that was it. All of that stuff was there. I couldn't have found that anyplace else.
Amazing. And from there, so we've worked for Lynn, and then you went on to work with, sorry, the names slipped my brain.
Suzanne
Sam.
Millinery, she had a store space that was kind of around the corner from Barney's. It was really close
Yes.
to Central Park, and she would do a ton of hats for the Central Park Conservancy luncheon.
Yes.
So she had her store space in the front, and then in the back, there was four of us back there that were making all of the hats. And that was a great experience at learning more couture techniques and how to do things custom for people, how to dye, how to make it
Yes.
match their outfit, doing it to everyone's individual head sizes. It was a great experience as well.
Oh, wow. And how was life back in New York City at that time?
Oh, it was fun. It was a lot of hats. I mean, I would work for Suzanne during the day, and then I would go back to my tiny studio apartment that had all of my, hat supplies in it at that point, and I would make more fascinators because I kept selling those through the hat shop in Linda, and it was really fun. That was also right at the same time, a lot of the millinery suppliers were starting to close.
Yeah.
And then that's when the Milliners Guild started right at that time period too, so that everybody could start sharing their resources. So the whole time I tended to find millinery and milliners very friendly and warm, that,
Yeah.
everybody was willing to share information, and it felt like a nice community.
Yeah. How amazing. And at what point did you go, I'd like to be out more on my own and creating my own designs? When did that happen for you?
I worked for Suzanne for probably a year and a half. And I think it probably also coincided with deciding I was ready to change out of New York. So I was originally from Dallas, Texas, and
Yeah.
I decided to move back to Dallas. And I thought I was going to have to make cowboy hats. That I was done with the beautiful couture hats that we made for these luncheons. And I made this little collection of cowboy hats. And I came down here and it was totally not what I thought it was at all. People in Dallas like to shop. I ended up with a really large clientele of men
Yes.
that were really snappy dressers. And at the time, it was like probably 2008. And I would do bow ties and pocket squares to match these newsboy hats. I would take like a group of 6 or 7 men out to a fabric store, and I would let them go crazy and pick out the fabric for their hats. And then they would all go next door and have beers, and I would stay and have it all cut and pay for it all. And then I would make the hats over the next few weeks. It was
My
that was
gosh.
not what I thought. And then there's a lot of people from Dallas that go to the Kentucky Derby. I
Yes.
think because we're central in the States and, we're not hiking, we're not at the beach. So people don't think too much about, sure, I'll hop on a plane and go to a horse race for the weekend. So once I tapped into that market, it also really opened up a whole new world of people in hats too.
And was that drawing on the skills of more the couture millinery and the fashion millinery you'd learnt when you're in New York, I guess?
Absolutely, which was wonderful because I loved that. And I was really sad to let that go. And it's funny what you're afraid of losing by making changes. And then you realize, like, oh, I wasn't losing that at all. It's still here.
You gained
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
And how did you go once you got to Dallas about setting up a workspace or connecting with clients?
I moved to Dallas. I moved back in with my parents and I had like turned the upstairs bedroom into my studio space. And
Thank you, Mum and
I
Dad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm back, and I ended up getting a store space first to work out of. I knew the area I wanted to be in. You could walk around it. It felt a little bit like a small New York, and I met these guys who were opening up a restaurant, and they wanted it to be like Dean and DeLuca in New York, and I was like, "Oh, sign me up! I'm in." So
That's my
I
vibe.
rented a studio space above their restaurant. And then I was still like trying to get out of my parents' house. I did. And then I met some girls, some women who had a really lovely high-end boutique in Dallas. And one of those ladies was also a fashion writer. And she really was instrumental. I met them. They loved the hats. They loved my story. And then she started just helping me get in the local newspaper, in the local magazines. She really helped me get more press. They came to do a photo shoot, at my parents' house in the upstairs bedroom, and we angled the camera. So it was just looking out the window with the hat. You didn't see anything else around
Yeah.
it. I always think sometimes we think everything needs to be perfect, like we need the perfect studio space, we need all these things in place before we try and launch ourselves, but it works out, just angle the camera the right way, you won't see it. So I started getting good press, which really helped. And then I just slowly started building a clientele. And like I said, it was a lot of men in the beginning, which surprised me. And then probably the second year I was in business, I started getting derby clients coming in.
Yeah.
And then that just really kept snowballing on itself. It really seems like it's such a word of mouth um, activity. I don't know. I guess the people who go to that, they all know each other. And slowly I just built up a reputation. I would be in with stylists from some of the high-end department stores. And so then they would send more people my way. And then getting in like the local media with pictures of my hats in there also helps cement like that the hats I was making were the hats that you would wear with your designer dress. Probably
Yeah.
that was, and that is what has kept growing every year. I want to make a really lovely couture hat that is hand sewn and hand dyed, and it's going to match your outfit. And being able to build the clientele that is wearing a really beautiful designer dress and can appreciate that and want that is like the gold star, right? That's what we
Absolutely.
all want.
Were you holding stock in your shop or were you making a custom order? How did you, and
I
are
did
you still running it in that way?
I did both. So I would make things off the shelf that I could sell, and then I would really do a lot of orders off the things that people could see. So I needed to have the physical inventory so that someone had something to try on, but
Yeah.
most of what I was selling was custom. And then I started doing a sale at the last Saturday of September from the very beginning. I would do a sale and I would take all the hats that I had left from the year before and I would just drastically mark them down. I remembered hearing that Best Ben would stand out the balcony of his factory and he would throw hats out to people waiting below. And that always stuck with me. And I was like, I want to make this fun. It's fun for me, and I want to make it fun for my friends and my neighbors who follow me and support me, but like maybe my hats are too expensive during the year for them to buy. And so on that Saturday, things would be more than 50% off. And it was one day only, first come, first serve. And like people would just come up and like everyone would leave with the treasure and they'd be so happy about it. And then it was motivation for me. Like that next day was like, okay, everything's gone.
Fresh slate.
Now what do I do? And you had to like, it was probably good as an early milliner at how to keep evolving and keep developing your skills because,
Yep.
like, okay, that batch is gone. Like, what am I doing now? How can I improve on what I had done before?
Yeah. And also pushing to, am I going to do a similar style again, or am I going to change and innovate and shift what the aesthetic is?
Always. I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and that's everything. It's the fact that it keeps changing every
Yeah.
year, and you're always changing that hat. You don't want to make the same one again.
What is your studio space like now?
So now my studio space is still quite small. I do have like I've never left the New Yorker has never left me. My spaces have always been tiny. But I have walls up in here that are covered with flowers. So I like to have the things out for people to see so that it helps, stoke the imagination of what they could have. So I have lots of silk flowers that are out up on the wall. I have another little selection of leather flowers that are out so people could see what they could have made. I have one huge rack that has all of my ribbons and silks in it. And then I have another rack that has, the crinoline and the more everyday fabric in it. I had this is my third version of studio, the one that I'm in now. And I had somebody in the neighborhood, one of my spaces was in an old auto garage, and he made
Have
me
fun.
hat stands out of transmission parts. And so right now my hats are all on these little discs that were from former like car transmissions, which is kind of
Amazing.
yeah, and it's really bright. The studio I have right now is the best light that I've ever had. So it makes
Oh, that
it
helps.
so nice with my aging eyes to be able to see the darker colors. And for a small space, it really makes me happy when people come in. I can fling the doors open and it feels bright and cheerful. And I want them to be transported from their everyday world into this magical space that has ridiculous hats and things that are not practical. And
A treasure, a wonderland of
yeah,
treasures.
that's for the
And
fun of it.
what's the mix of hats that you're making at the moment?
At the moment, I my biggest season is Derby and Ascot, and now that that is wrapped up, the past several years I've rolled right into summer hats, and have done sun hats and everyday fedoras for men and women. But this year I decided I wanted to keep. And I'm sure other people feel this way too. I feel like after the Derby, I'm on a bit of a momentum. I'm working out some new techniques. I have some new skills that are blooming. And I feel like in the past, I have stopped working on those because then I transitioned to everyday hats. And this year, I was like, I don't want to stop that. I want to let that continue to grow. So this season, instead of doing new summer hats, I'm doing more custom orders for people. So it's more specific. And then I've continued to do the racing hats, and it's been interesting. I've had racing clients come to me longer now. I think
Uh,
I'm putting that energy out there that we're still making those. So
How wonderful. How do you go about sourcing your supplies?
when I first moved to Dallas, I was so sad that I could not just walk out the door and go find supplies. But now it feels like everything is online. So I have different places that I like to get my felts from. In the US, we have two different probably sources of felts, and they each have different colors and different weights. So some are better for certain hats and some are better for others. I really love Mood in New York for all my silks for the Derby. They're so beautiful and they send you such huge swatches. So now, whenever I'm getting swatches in, I've created my own swatch book with all of those. So I'm able to just go back in when someone has something purple, and I've collected, 15 purple swatches over the years. And then I still love to buy, I really like to get some of my feathers and vintage straws from Peter Sham's uh, in England. That's always the most exciting part of Derby season coming around again is I get to overspend on their website and, open up the box with the pink paper and see what's in there. And then I've used Etsy a little bit. Because I'm in Texas, some of my fedoras like have more of a Southwest feel. And there's some people out there, there's someone that I'm just loving right now who does these really beautiful deer antler beads on these like thin
Yeah.
beaded hat bands. They're so beautiful. The colors are gorgeous. They're really well made. And I'm loving being able to put that on stuff.
Have you made as many classic Texan shapes as you thought you may have?
No,
Western
not at all.
styles?
Not at all. I have done very few Western and I've done a little bit, but I'm in Dallas and Stetson is here. And I think I reached a point where I was like, I'm really good at the racing hats. Like that
Yeah.
excites me. I have a skill set there that not everybody has. The Stetson factory here is amazing. I went and did a tour there a couple of years ago with the Milliners Guild and was really blown away by just the pure number of hats that these people are blocking in there. It's great. Um,
Sensational.
yeah, so I'm like, if you want a softer hat, a more fashion hat, that is something I can provide. But I am not trying to be Stetson. I'm not trying to offer a Western weight
Yeah.
cowboy hat.
So you mentioned the Milliners Guild in that. You are currently the president. Is that
I am
correct?
currently the president of the Milliners Guild, which has really been an adventure. I was in the guild in New York and then I wasn't when I moved back to Dallas and years went by. And then when COVID happened, I really felt like I wanted to connect more with other milliners. And I think COVID also helped spread the way of the Zoom meetings. So
Yeah.
suddenly I feel like the guild was able to have a much more diverse group of members because our meetings all went to Zoom. Um, so I felt like I could participate more. And the president prior to me was from Austin, Texas. So
Yes.
the Texans are taking over.
Look out.
So I joined the guild, which was really fun. It was really great to connect with other milliners. But being the president the past 2 years has really helped it become what I wanted it to be. I feel like now I do have friends in the millinery world in the US, and it's great. It's so fun to have people that you can text and chat with during the day that are going through similar things that you are, that you can throw out, a picture of a hood. Does anybody have this straw? Does anybody know where I can get this? My brim keeps doing this. Can you tell me why this is happening? I've gotten some vintage blocks that I can't tell what they are in any way whatsoever. And it's kind of fun to post that, like mystery block. Who thinks this, what do you guys think this
What do
does?
you
How
do?
should I block this? What do you do with that? And it's really fun. I call them all my coworkers.
I really like that analogy because many of us are working on our own spaces, and to have that point of connection with other like-minded small business owners is invaluable.
It's really invaluable. And I think it makes everyone's hats better. It makes it more fun.
It's fantastic. What are some of the projects the team at the Milliners Guild have taken on this year that you've really enjoyed working on?
The hat contest was the big project that we've been working on, and it went on for a little bit longer than we thought it would. When I started a year and a half ago as president, we had already picked the topic of the hat contest, which was Mildred Blunt, who was an African American milliner from the 1930s era in Hollywood. And she had such a neat story, but as we looked into it and started to research it, there was very little information on her that was concrete fact, partly because she wasn't a white man and her story was not recorded in the same way. So, in order to talk about her more, we felt like we needed more concrete information. So, we ended up hiring a historian to flesh out her story more and find more facts about her. So, the contest
Amazing.
kind of extended by several months as we decided we really wanted to learn more about her. Um, Everyone got really impassioned about her. It was really fun. It was really fun to learn about her, but to also feel like here's an American milliner whose story deserves to be told, and we felt like we were able to do that in a way.
What a fantastic platform to have as the Milliners Guild to be able to capture her story and share it so widely as well.
And share it so widely. It was really neat. So we're working on an exhibit coming up with that, with the winners from that competition, which should be in New York. We redid our website this year, which
Big project.
is not any milliner's favorite thing to do. Uh, but the volunteers really came out. It's interesting to have something. I think we're coming up on our 20th year in 2 years. And it's an organization that's just run by volunteers, and you continually have to get new people involved, and keep motivating people to do stuff. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a new website and there wouldn't be a hat contest.
The Milliners Guild's provided some really different opportunities for collaboration. How else do you work with some of the other milliners in the guild?
So in my studio, I sell my own hats. And then I also sell my best friend, Jill Quartermash Millinery. We met while working together in New York, and she is also a hat maker. And I sell her hats in here. And then I also sell a couple of other people's hats from the guild. And I love with hats that everyone's hand is different, and you get a totally different style hat when somebody else is making it. Um, and it's really fun to be able to offer that. It's nice when you reach a point in hat making where you're no longer trying to figure out how you can make everything, and you can appreciate, well, this is my style and this is what I do really well. And that's what that person does really well. And instead of me trying to take on that, I'm just going to sell their hat in here. Like it's kind of liberating.
That's very cool. So, what are some of your projects you've been working on recently that are getting you excited in the workroom?
I am always trying to think of something new. Like, how can I keep evolving and keep changing? And I felt like after COVID, in an effort to keep selling hats, it seemed like the fedoras were the things that were selling. So
Yes.
I just really changed my inventory over outside of derby hats, and it was all fedoras all the time. And when I would look at a hat, I wasn't thinking, what shape did I want to do? How did I want to make it different? My brain just instantly went to, how am I going to trim that fedora to be different? And so this summer, I made a pact to myself that I was not going to wear a fedora. I was going to get outside of
Ooh.
that style. So it's been fun to think of different shapes. You know, I can still do a wide brim, but I've been doing more flat tops, more bolero shapes, more kind of wider brim bucket hats. It's forced me to get out of a rut I think I was in a little bit. And I've really loved that. That's been really fun.
What a fun challenge.
Yeah, yeah. If it didn't keep changing, I think at a certain point you'd get tired of making the hat.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Also, to offer your customers a bit of a change of offering as well. Have they
Uh-huh.
shifted with that? Did you find that there were maybe more conservative purchases through the COVID period? And they're getting more excited? Did that reflect in their buying, or it was more what you were making shifted?
I do think that people, probably because we were home and not going out, I think everyone's style kind of shrunk back a little bit to what was comfortable and what felt good. So it was more about what was a functional hat. And now I do feel like people are having more fun with their clothes and how they're expressing themselves and going out. And I think that the hats are getting more fun again too. I do see that.
Like, did
Thank
most of your
goodness.
clients come into your space, or do you interact with some of them online as well?
Half and half. I do a lot online, but my favorite is for someone to come into the space, especially if I haven't met them. I really want to see them in person and measure their head size and see what kind of hats look good on their face and to see the things that they gravitate to. And then from there, I feel like I can handle doing the hats online. Once I get to know someone's style, I'm like, oh, okay, I know what it is that you're looking for. I know the shape you really like, and it's really fun to go back and forth with that. But for an initial visit, I really like it in person.
Yes, that's part of the experience of having something custom made for you as well, as that interaction with the designer and seeing how they respond to you and the style and what they can offer you in a way that can't be replicated online necessarily.
And I'm sure everyone feels this way. And when I'm trying different hats on people, when it's the right hat, everything changes. They stand up straighter, their whole demeanor changes, and you're like, oh, we're done. This is it.
That's it. We're
It's
stopping.
I know. Sometimes it's the first hat, and I'll say, I'm gonna keep trying hats on you so you get the full experience. But I can already tell you that this is the one
That
that
was the
you're
one.
going. This is the one.
Are your hats still stocked up in New York, or do you have any other stockists around the States or around the world?
I really stopped. It seemed like I was moving more into custom hats and meeting people in person. So now I don't have them in other stores. I have them online on my website, which I do sell off of there, or people come into the studio.
So cool.
I felt like keeping track of hats elsewhere, what's on consignment, that also is a whole other job into itself. And it's like, I really just want to make hats. When I
Mm.
was playing around with having outside store spaces and I was looking at opening up like a brick and mortar street front store, um, some business advisors I was talking to, as they listened to me, they were like, you sound like you like to make hats. You don't sound like you want to run a store. And it was the most valuable information that anybody has given me. I was like, yes, that is exactly it. So my studios have always been on a second floor, tucked back in another building. I've never had that like street front full on hat shop.
Is part of that they then have to seek you out and they're coming with purpose rather than someone coming in and browsing?
100%. Yes. So the people who've come to me, it's because they want a hat and they are definitely seeking me. And then as my website has gotten better over the past few years, that has really been lovely with the Derby. When people are messaging me to come in for that, I can send them the link to my website and say, I would love to meet with you. Take a look and make sure my style of hat is what you're looking for. And for so many years, I would get people coming in with pictures of someone else's hat, and I would be like, that's beautiful, but that's not what I do. And that person still makes hats. So you could definitely contact that hat maker and they could make you that hat. For a while when Nick Fouquet really took off, which was great. He did wonders for like the hat industry here. But so many people would just want me to copy his hat. And I would be like, he's making hats. Like, great news. You can get that hat from Nick Fouquet and it's going to look just the way you want it to. But that's not what's happening here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Such a good piece of advice for a customer as well, that if that they're coming for a House of MacGregor hat, they're not coming for anyone else's hat.
Yeah. And that's why you're here. That's what I do well. You want me to do that. If you're having me do something that's inspired by somebody else, it's not going to be my best work.
How did you decide on your label name?
I was a hat by Cassie when I was in New York, and I made more women's hats. And when I was moving to Dallas, I knew I wanted to do more men's hats too. And I didn't feel like a hat by Cassie expressed that. And I was trying to think of a new name. And my best friend Jill, who's also a hat maker, was watching House of Elliot at the time. And she was like, "You should be House of MacGregor." And I was like, "Oh my God, I should be House of MacGregor." That was it. There was
That was
no more
done.
names in the running.
What's coming up on your workbench that's exciting for you?
I am doing a hat. I did not do a hat for the contest, for the Mildred Blunt contest. So I am making my own version of a movie inspired hat by Mildred Blunt that I'm really excited about. I'm obsessed with the woman and always want to make a hat from that movie. So I think that is what I'll be working on. And then moving into fall, I'm really excited about berets this fall. I want to take what I did this summer by pushing myself to not do a fedora and carry that on into fall and see what different shapes and styles I can come out with that are still not fedoras.
So we can expect a beret era from you, maybe.
This is going to be my beret era. I do think this will be my beret era. Uh-huh.
So exciting. So amazing. Oh, so many fantastic hat stories and hat wisdom. It's been so wonderful to speak to you, Cassie. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking to you.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Milliner.Info. I hope you enjoyed hearing Cassie's story. Thank you to our amazing Patreon podcast sponsors for their support of this series. Hat Academy, Milliner Australia, Hatters Millinery Supplies, House for Dawn, Judith M. Millinery Supply House, Hats by Lico, Be Unique Millinery, Lifted Millinery, Louise McDonald Milliner, The Hat Magazine, Hat Blocks Australia, and a special thank you and welcome to our latest Patreon podcast sponsor, the Millinery Retreat School of Millinery. Check out these Patreon sponsors in our show notes. There's a link to each of their websites, so you can head across and see what they all get up to and support these amazing businesses in the millinery industry. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie, and thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Millinery Info, and I look forward to talking hats with you again soon.